better if I can do it early. This is ninth grade. We're reviewing for the test tomorrow, and Anna Grace has an answer to one of the questions, which is, the last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right thing or do the right deed for the wrong reason. This is a quote. You have to determine the speaker, the context, and the meaning. So I'm going to ask her to repeat that.
So Thomas is the speaker, and he just got tempted by the last tempter, which was being a martyr for the wrong reason, and just wanting the pride of dying, like becoming a saint and being praised. And he said that was to do the right deed for the wrong reason, because he knew in his heart that's not what, he wasn't dying just because of his belief, he was dying because he wanted the praise.
Yes, and so we talked about the fact that motivations do matter in why we do things. And I think that's the problem. You do the right thing, but if you had the wrong motive, you don't get credit for it. I can imagine that's a pretty big one that I'd probably want to put on the test. Yes, Tim. Good job. Good job last night, Tim.
Thank you.
And everybody else involved. Go ahead.
On the murder in the Cathedral test review, I'm copying down the notes that you guys took in classes today. Oh no, wait, I think I found it. Oh, I figured it out.
All right.
Never mind.
So let's go back. We're going to go through these kind of briskly. Go back to the first one. Action is suffering, and suffering is action.
That's Thomas.
Thomas and the temptation. So both would be correct, because the temptation repeats it to him and mocks him. But what does he mean by it? Yes, Lena.
So I think that means I would suffer no matter what I do, so I might as well do the right thing. So like, even if he takes action, then he'll suffer, and even if he doesn't do anything, he'll suffer, and that in itself is an action as well.
That's good. That's good. So not suffering, the word suffering can often mean letting, allowing. And if you allow something to happen, you're doing the same thing as making it happen. And so, yeah, so that's his, if he allows something, you're letting it happen. So it's all points in the same direction, that action and not doing something kind of lead to the same thing.
Not doing something is doing something.
Yes, right. We talked about that. Not speaking up is really agreeing with it. If you don't speak up, you're agreeing with if you don't disagree with them, you're agreeing. If you don't break up the fight, you're in the fight. You're allowed it to happen. All right, number 2. I was the king, his arms, his better reason, but once exaltation would now be only mean descent. Yes.
I think this is Thomas,
Yeah.
and he's talking to the second tempter,
Yeah.
because he was talking about power, and he's talking about the chancellorship, like being the chancellor.
Yeah.
And how he did have that power, and he could have had so much, but that really it was just like starting a road into being deceitful and in a path that he didn't want to be a part of.
Okay. So by accepting that job, the chancellorship, he was taking a demotion too. It was also a demotion. The job is less than the current job that he had. That's another reason why he decided not to do it, because you're asking me to take a pay cut, so to speak, to take a demotion. I've already got the better job. Why would I want this job? Thank you. Number 3, if the archbishop cannot trust the king, and by the way, number 2 was his response to the temptation. That's what we pointed out is the words that he used to argue against the temptation. Number 3, if the archbishop cannot trust the king, how can he trust those who work for the king's undoing?
Wait, can you say it one more time?
If the archbishop cannot trust the king, it's number 3, how can he trust those who work for the king's undoing? Yes.
I don't think he necessarily can, because they're under the king. Oh, he's out. Sorry. I think it means he's trying to find the good, I guess.
Well, remember what we talked about. If somebody's cheating on somebody and I trust the cheater, is that a wise thing to do? It's not, because if somebody would cheat with one person, they would cheat. Right, and so he's saying that, well, you're cheating against the king, and yet you're asking me to join you.
So you would
You
cheat
can't
against
trust them
him as
either.
well.
Yeah, he can't, you're saying I just can't get the king, I can't trust him, but I can't trust you either, because you're, right.
He's two-faced.
Right, and that was his argument about not joining the barons in overthrowing the king.
When did Thomas say this?
Well, he said this with the third temptation. So the second and third quotes here are specifically spoken to the tempter to, in his declining the temptation.
Wait, what is number 1 and number 2 talking?
Number one is, if I do something, it's an action. If I don't do something, it's also an action. So actions, you can't run away from responsibility. You can't just say, I'm not gonna do something, I'm gonna avoid it. And we won't go into the specific context of what he was saying, but you can't run away from an action. All right, so the fourth one we did, the temptation ones, we can skip that. The fifth one, we didn't mention this, well, maybe we did, not everybody class did. This is, who's the fourth one? And behind the judgment is void, more hard than active shapes of hell. That would be the chorus. And this is about the time Thomas is being killed, or almost killed. C-H-O-R-U-S. It's, that's about all you need to know about the context. It's right before Thomas is killed, and they're talking about hell, and it's an interesting view of hell, one where hell is, you're not being actively punished, but it's empty, it's void, it's nothing. Yeah. Anyway, hell, this view of hell says that it's empty. Think of your most boring, being in a room with nothing to do. Solitary confinement in a prison would be hell.
It's a punishment within itself.
Yes.
It's a punishment within a punishment.
Because you can't run away from it. You have to face it. And then if you're in hell, you're facing your own sin and you're absent from God and anything good. All right, the fifth or sixth one, 3, 4, 5, 6. I want to have, you want to read it?
I would not have the house of prayer, the church of Christ, the sanctuary turned into a fortress.
It's Thomas.
Yeah.
Thomas.
And what's the context? All right, you two can handle it. So which one of you go? You go first, and then Anna
So
goes.
this is during the time when the knights came and the bishops were trying to help him and
Yeah.
trying to lock the doors so that the knights couldn't come in. And he was just being like, no, don't protect me, don't
Right.
protect me.
Oh yeah, the back door.
They were shutting all. They were trying to shut all the doors. And what does it mean? Why is this important?
Because he was like ready, he was choosing to like, well, first of all, his whole job was to like make the church, like to present the church in a way of like, so that people would come to the church. And so, like for him to say that he's basically dying for his, like as a martyr in like the right way this time.
Yes, he's not going to let the church's wall, physical
Right.
wall, he'll let God protect him, because he said, I'm giving myself into God's hands. If he wants to save me, he can. If he wants to take me. Remember the time he protected, well, you didn't see that part, but Charlemagne, Oliver should have been killed the first time, but he wasn't. God protected him. We can do that to Thomas.
I have a question.
He wants-
Is the bishops being seen as God's protection?
Say that again?
Okay, so in a sense, so you know how God's like, he sends a sign in a sense, right? Or he would send
Right.
protection. What if the bishops were the
That's-
protection and he evaded the protection?
That's a really good question. I like the way you're thinking. So in other words, he could have used the bishops to protect him. One thing he wouldn't do, he wouldn't violate a principle of his.
And close the doors, yeah.
He wouldn't violate a principle to protect him. So that's what Thomas was saying. You know, the church is not a fortress.
Right.
And so God, but it's a great question, because that's how God works sometimes. He brings people into your life. You have to be really discerning to understand what's going on. I like that. This was the hardest question, I think, in the list. We didn't really talk about it, but you argue by our results as this world does to settle if an act be good or bad.
Is that Thomas?
It is Thomas. And he's talking to the priests at the end of the book, before he died, of course. And he hasn't been killed yet, but they're trying to protect him, and he says you argue about results as this world does to settle if an act be good or bad. Anybody want to try your hand at that? I think I can. Celeste.
I think when he says you argue by results as this world does, it's like they're trying to protect him because they think everything will be better if he is still alive, and to settle if an act be good or bad. I don't really know how to answer that.
But like the results probably mean like she said, they're trying to protect him because they think he'll be better alive. But it probably would be better like if he were to die.
That is a really good answer. I hated to interrupt you. I was just so, yeah, that is I think it's the hardest question. They're just looking at it that one way. You're dead, then it's over. But that's the result. But like you said, maybe his death is actually better, which I think you're saying, and I think the book proves is true. Very good. I gotta include that one, just because of that. That was such a good answer, yes.
Could you repeat that? It was a little quiet for this.
Yeah, why don't you do it?
So the result is like to argue that they were trying to protect him because they thought that he would have been better off alive, but in reality, like the argument by result, the result part is where like he's really just better off as being like dead and like dying. And that's like the better result.
It's gonna be better for the church, it's God's will. Just the immediate result, that word is not in there, but you argue about immediate result, as opposed to what Neil's talking about, is the long-term results are actually better than if he died. Good job, yeah.
I have a question for you, Mr. Powell.
Yeah.
So, now that the Knights, well, not anymore since we're finished reading the book, now that the Knights have been to trial and they're trying to prove their case about how he's either like self-inflicted or how he wishes upon himself, since everybody is saying that it's better off if he's God's will, do you think the Knights should be charged?
Hey, yeah.
I don't know.
That's because they committed.
Well, what would they be charged with? I mean, they would be charged with, I mentioned the Nuremberg trial. That was after World War II. All the Nazis that survived the war were put on trial, the Nazi officials, and every single one of them argued that they were just doing their job. And the jury didn't buy it. And they were almost all hanged for cooperating. In other words, if a police officer, a government official, a general in an army, people with authority that we normally respect and obey, but if they ask you to do something that's clearly illegal or clearly immoral, then it becomes your responsibility to say no, which is what we're talking about here. Yeah. They're trying to pawn it off and say, he told me to do it, I just had to do it. No, you didn't have to do it. You didn't have to kill him. You could have refused to kill him. So we talked out, these arguments are very weak. Okay, and then the next one. No, for the church is stronger for this action, triumph in adversity, fortified by persecution. Number 3, priest number 3. He's the one who said, this is like you were saying, he was looking at the long view, like it's actually better that he died. We didn't want him to die, but since he did, the church is gonna get stronger for it.
Is this after Thomas's death?
Yes. So his argument was, I'm trying to think of a good word, be depressed, don't be sad. Yeah, yeah, don't be melancholy. The last two are from the chorus, the last couple of pages. I know we didn't talk about this, we'll finish this. I like it. He said, we fear, I always have trouble with this, so maybe you can explain it, but let's go to the last one. First of all, he said, those who deny thee could not deny if thou didst not exist. So, this is actually the chorus.
Oh,
And the chorus is the one who speaks at the end, who finishes the play, starts it and finishes it. And they are mentioning that the assumption is, it's not just an assumption, we believe it's a fact, but the assumption of his argument is God does exist. So people who deny him, if God didn't exist, nobody would be alive to deny him. Denying God is a freedom that you have, that God gives you, but you wouldn't even exist if God didn't exist. I think it's a neat thing to say. All things should praise God. All things were meant to praise God. That's the correct. That's the.
Isn't this like
thing.
after like the plant speech, like the chorus gave about how like the plants?
Everything praises God except men. Everything praises God unconsciously. Man has the privilege of praising him voluntarily and consciously. And so that's why it's such a heinous act not to praise God. Because everything else in the universe, you're in the small minority if you're not praising God. If you compare yourself to all the created things. And then we fear the injustice of men less than the justice of God. Yes.
So basically, it's like saying, like, even if you get the death penalty here on earth, it compares to nothing if you, like, of the wrath that God can bring down on you.
Right. And that's good. That's good. That's what he's saying. And we fear God's justice more than we fear man's injustice. That's what sort of confuses it in my mind. But that's actually right. We ought to fear God's justice more than man's injustice. You're killed unjustly. Well, you don't have anything to worry about because God will honor that. I don't know if I will include that. I'll like it, but so I'm going to pick some of those, and we went over them. And last time I picked 5, but we had 50 minutes to take it. This time we have 40 minutes, and that last one was just slightly too long. Not everybody is going to work as quick as others, but I will have to pare this down. Yes, sir.
Did we answer the one with the last temptation is the greatest treason?
Yes, that's the one Anna Grace answered twice. You need it again?
Could you say it again?
Yeah. Anna Grace, can we call on you one more time?
Yes. For
The last temptation is the greatest treason.
Oh, yes, so Thomas basically is saying that the last temptation was the hardest temptation because it's like speaking on the heart of whether you should die for the right reasons or whether you should die just because you know you're going to get praise and you're going to be worshipped and people are going to know your name instead of dying the right way and dying honorably.
Yes, so your motives, as we said, have to line up with your actions. Doing the right thing's not enough. Got to do it for the right reason. So let's look at the literary terms. These are actually, I think, the easy ones. Last time I think I picked, I forgot what I told you, but I picked maybe 8. Yeah, this time I'm just not going to pick as many. I maybe give you 5.
Personification is like the exaggeration of word in like a sentence.
Are you thinking about hyperbole?
Oh yeah.
That's when you exaggerate.
Personification is when you put a training characteristic on something that is
Not. Yeah.
That's right, absolutely. And here at the beginning of the story, she personifies the seasons. Somber November, happy December, golden October. Those are kind of examples. What is it? The winter waits and whispers. What was that?
The New Year wait.
The New Year. Very good. I couldn't remember that. It helps to have a good memory. That's why I write things down, because may not have such a good memory, but you can't either remember everything. That's why you write things down. That's why you underline. Yeah, it's a New Year way to live. That's good. So we know that one. Do any of these you not know? I mean, it seems like all of these are pretty simple metaphor comparing.
You have them in the,
Maybe just
The
the
notes.
example.
What's drama again?
All right, so what did you say, Sue?
that they're in the notes of the slides.
Yeah, they're in the slides. And I heard two questions.
I said drama.
Yeah, drama is,
Verse drama.
verse drama is the way this play was written. It's a drama, which is a play written in poetry, Shakespeare.
Oh, that's all.
And that's the first time I noticed somebody put something on my Shakespeare. What did it say? Gold?
Old fresh
A
piece of
play written in
humanity.
poetry.
Did he say that? He must have said that.
It says Bill O'Reilly.
Oh.
I
What
think
if-
they just meant, they put it on there because he is a bold French piece of humanity.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, it's just a play like written in.
Or they just put a paper there.
Oh, I get it, it's like
But
verse
they didn't
drama.
put paper in it.
It's not like a verse, you're writing down a verse,
It's
like it's just
poetry.
in poetry.
Yeah.
What is verse drama?
Verse drama, this play is written in verse drama. It's a play written in the form of poetry. Internal rhyme
It's rhyme within the sentence.
within a line.
Laity,
Yeah.
gaiety.
Laity, gaiety.
24.
Very good. Rhyme scheme? Yeah,
Do these have to be examples from the book?
not really.
Okay,
No.
and the rhyme scheme is a consistent pattern of rhyme that runs throughout the poem.
What's the one rhyme scheme that we noticed too, but which one?
So it goes like, outward
Yeah.
to the middle.
Remember that? A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A.
Yeah.
That's really unusual. Then you have a name.
Tim, say
Uh,
that again? I'm sorry.
Also, what were you gonna say?
A rhyme couplet.
That's it. It's the simplest kind of rhyme scheme you can come up with. 2 lines that rhyme, over and over and over
Oh,
again.
that's what a rhyme scheme is?
Well, it's just one type of rhyme scheme.
So if you put like give me an example, could you literally just say A, B, D, C?
Sure, I would understand that. If you use the letters to show the rhyme scheme, I would understand that, yeah.
What,
Okay,
speak
so
again?
I try to clarify this
So
again.
it's like A,
On the
B, C,
test, we're gonna be allowed to use
D,
examples
C,
from other
B, A.
sources.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, because
Because
on
it's like
on the question sheet, it
A's
says that it has to
rhyme,
be from.
B's
I,
rhyme.
so-
I always do that, but then when it comes to the test, I'm usually just thankful that you can give me an example. All right, so, rhyme scheme, internal rhyme, personification, we've done those things, there are only 8 of these.
Imagery.
Okay, imagery, right. We didn't make a big deal about it, but it was particularly the first tempter. The first tempter is talking about pleasure, remember that? And she or he talks about, she talks about snow. I'm trying to find, my book is literally in pieces. The first tempter. Snow in the branches shall float as sweet as blossoms ice along the ditches, mirror in the sunlight. These are examples, these are pictures that,
So we just use one.
that appeal to your, and this is, when you define imagery, you have to use these 5 words: taste, touch, smell, sound, and sight.
5 senses.
The 5 senses. You can just say 5 senses, but if you don't say that, then I'm not sure that you really understand imagery. Good imagery appeals to the senses, and all poets use them.
Tragedies, but, kinda like a tragedy.
Well, remember, a tragedy is always solemn and grave, and it's about the downfall of a character. Somebody's gonna die in a tragedy, usually, but they'll definitely fall. In other words, they're in a person of high position and they'll lose that position.
Like Thomas.
Yeah, well, Thomas, yeah,
Or Bailey.
but usually it's the person's fault. You could argue this is Thomas's fault,
Right.
but it's not like King Lear or Macbeth, or they were bad people. They were okay people, but they did something really bad. Thomas didn't really do anything bad. He suffered for God.
Right.
So that's tragedy. Imagery, symbolism, when one thing stands for another. That's simple. I'm trying to think of symbols in this book. Well, Canterbury is a symbol of Thomas. You know, the church is where people go. So we talk about Canterbury, but you think of Thomas. And metaphor is one thing, is being compared to something else. Dissimilar thing. Two dissimilar things are being compared. And you don't use the word like or as.
Yeah, that's a symbol.
What?
Does Canterbury still stand?
It does. 1,000+ years old.
Is it more of like a museum site, like when you go and like you look at?
No, I think it's an active church, an Anglican church. Anybody here Anglican?
No,
Anybody know, anybody, I think Cup goes to Redeemer Church. The Coxes, when they were here, they used to go, Ms. Roberts used to go there, I don't know if she does, but it's an Anglican as opposed to Episcopal. They're similar, they kind of from the same background, but
Wait, what are we talking about?
we're talking about symbols, because the church at Canterbury is a symbol of Thomas,
Okay.
and she asked, is it still there? Is it still a church? So you take a look at it. What do you need? We got about 10 minutes.
Oh, symbolism.
Symbolism is what
Don't
we
we
said.
have at 8:55 because we have chapel?
You're right. So we got 5 minutes.
Wait, say it again, say symbolism.
It's when an object, a place, a person, event
I
stands
checked
for
out my
something,
Beowulf.
Oh.
You have
represents something.
Yeah, they are Beowulf and.
We have 4 minutes. Let me see if I can give you 2 things. I think everybody's good with this. All right. Sorry. Let me give you Song of Roland, and you can keep it because you're gonna. And I'll give you Beowulf. You don't need it today. I can give it to you tomorrow. But this is Song of Roland. One we just took.
It's
I don't wanna do that.
I said 95.
Oh, okay.
No, I did not tell you 95. I had just misremembered.
No, we're going to South Carolina over Christmas break. We have to add the number 20 team in the next year.
Yeah.
No, it's not GDS. GDS is going to. They're not in this. They're going to. Oh.
What number is GDS? First.
In the state they are.
In the state, I was thinking.
They're not, they're number 9.
Hang on to these. Hang on. I'm going to ask you to turn these back in. I'd like to keep them so after the exam, even the day of the exam, I'm gonna ask you to turn them in.
But no, they're actually like, they beat the number 13. Team we have
No, I
to
did all of them.
That's from Florida. That's from Norway now. But we're down there in the south, so we're not going. Why would you say?
Because if you're going to Ohio, you're going.
Wait, because Florida's down here. On
I'm
the
not
map.
saying so you going down, but when you go up, you say you going up, like we're going up there, or we're going down there.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like when I go to Mississippi, I say we're going down.
There you go.
When I say South Carolina,
Thank you.
I don't know, I just believe it.
Look.
Is that what-
Remember him saying only do 50 and you can skip 2. Oh, that was for
Hey,
these. Where I actually
Yeah.
did it.
The book have time.
Very cool.
Yeah, this is on the
Yeah, it's
This is
not
probably
me.
my best grade ever.
85.
How much are these worth? What section am I only do? Yeah, E6, you only did, you only had to do 4, or, I think you only had to do 5.
All right, I want to give you, hang on, I want to give you Beowulf, but did you hear what I said earlier? One thing I should have, I want them back, and I should have put them in a folder, but I didn't. So you're gonna have to keep up with this. You're gonna have 3 tests. You're gonna have murder, but let me give you these. These will help you. Please keep up with them.
What I get?
If,